Hi, thank you for coming today. This is a panel on growing and processing natural dyes. I'm Zoe Gilbertson. My background is design, but today I'm involved in education and trying to get a new textile economy that operates in an ecological, fair and just way off the ground. Today we're going to dive deep into an area that is quickly evolving, moving on from last year where we introduced the idea of growing natural dyes. We're now moving into people who are actually starting to do it and get this thing going with real live projects. And our amazing speakers here are going to give a 15-minute talk or so each, and then you'll have an opportunity to ask questions afterwards, quick burning questions, before we move on to the next speaker. And then at the end, we're going to move into a general Q&A. So we're going to start off with Babs. Babs Behan is a natural dye artist, designer, author, and textile producer. She's the owner of Botanical Inks, a natural dye house. You can see all her beautiful products here on the table. She started the Bristol Cloth Project, pioneering large-scale natural dyeing within England. And she's currently researching naturally abundant British plant dyes, which are suitable for large-scale natural dyeing. So today she's going to talk to us about that and her plans for this project. So Babs.
Thanks Zoe. Hi everyone. So Botanical Inks Natural Dye House pioneered large-scale natural dye productions for textiles within England in 2018 with the Bristol Cloth Project. Can you all hear me okay? Is that, yeah. So it's the first large-scale natural dye production in this country in about 200 years. And many people don't know that natural dyeing actually preceded our contemporary synthetic dyeing industry, which is of contemporary use. Natural dyes really only went out of fashion when synthetic dyes came into use, simply because they're cheaper to produce, they take little to no skill to use, and they're very easy to replicate identically, which is really useful for large-scale productions. So William Morris was one of the last factory producers to champion the use of natural dyes in large-scale dyeing, and so it's been really exciting to see that coming back to these shores and a great re-emergence of interest in natural pigments. The problem with using the synthetic pigments is that they're derived from petroleum, which, as we all know, is highly toxic. It's harmful to our bodies. It's terrible if it ends up in our soil and water and air, and it degrades natural environments and habitats. So it's really important that we transition away from using petrochemical pigments and return back to our traditional natural colours instead. One of the things I've been really interested in since doing the Bristol cloth is looking at how we can actually start using pigments for printing, with packaging being a huge use of printing in this country and globally, and that spans across all consumer product industries. So the Bristol cloth is a 100% biodegradable, locally sourced, fully traceable fabric. It's made with regenerative lamb's wool from Fernhill Farm in Somerset. There's some examples of it here. And there's a cashmere edition which uses a regeneratively farmed Mongolian grey cashmere, which is the finest in the world, and that's also farmed in Devon. It's all dyed with heritage natural plant dyes and completely locally manufactured within British shores. It's 100% biodegradable. There's no harmful toxic chemicals used in any of these productions. So the first edition was in 2018, and about 200 meters of fabric. And it's been really important to me that we used heritage British dyes. So there's 3 key dyes in our history which have been used for most dye productions. So madder root, which gives a red, indigo leaf for blue, and wildflower for yellow. So the three primary colours, red, blue and yellow, and you over dye them to get the secondary and also the tertiary colours. You can just use these three dyes to get the whole rainbow, which is really exciting. Of course, there are many other plants as well to use. But for the Bristol cloth production, I wanted to use these three. So the first production is madder and weld, which gives an orangey red. And the second production was actually the cashmere one, which uses indigo, which is a much more complex processing system. So it's a much higher value dye and product. The first edition was retailing for £65 to £350 for scarves, about £100 a metre for fabric, whereas the cashmere edition is about £650 for a scarf. The second edition is the one on the end here, which is the white and black with the yellow stripe. And interestingly, this one we're using dye as mulberry, which is a wood dye. And this became much more popular. It became much more fashionable in our historical use of natural dyeing when we opened up the sea routes and started logging from the Americas and bringing in trees. The wood dyes, they became much easier for people to use for large productions and cheaper because they're not having to use any cultivation practices. They're just chopping down the trees and sailing them in. So another interesting thing about this is that they don't really need any kind of fixative. Because it's a wood dye, it means it's really high in tannin or tannic acid. So if you don't have to do the mordanting process, the fixative process, then you've just saved a whole chunk of time by skipping out a whole step of the processing, and you're not having to use any kind of mineral or chemical fixative. So I've been really interested in what wood dyes we have actually available in the UK that we could be using for dyeing for a more streamlined large-scale production. So when you're working with big factories and lots of mills, it's simply you can get the process, the better. It just saves a lot of time and headache. So when I've been producing these editions of Bristol cloth, it's about 200 meters per edition, and it's been much easier for me to do the production by hiring dye house facilities and taking my natural dyes in. I completely decontaminate the equipment, wash it all down, do the natural dye myself with huge vats and automated lifting systems. It's incredibly simple to use. But one of the things that I found is that it's really important for me to turn up at the dye house with extracts. So these are in a powder form that I can simply mix into a solution to then put straight into the machine. And that's a missing link in our system in the UK. We don't have extract producers in the UK of natural pigments. So these have had to come in from overseas. They are in Europe, and there's a huge industry really in Asia and also South America. So I've been really interested in how we can relocalize this system. But you can take fresh plant matter from the farm or wherever you're producing it while crafting it. You can chop it and take it to the dye house. The problem is when you're working with a system of independent mills, the timing is unreliable about when you're actually going to get your slot in the mill. So it's really helpful if you can show up with something that's dry that you mix with water and not have the panic of having truckloads of leaves or wood or whatever it is that's potentially going to start rotting. So drying is another possibility, but that takes a huge amount of space when you're looking at large-scale systems. Freezing is another one, same problem. So I'm really interested in, how do you make a dry, easily storable, easily transportable product to take to these dye houses. So a recent project I've been doing is for Fibreshed South-West England. And so it's looking at wood dyes that are grown in the UK, informed by our traditional natural dye heritage. I'm currently based in Dartmoor, and there's an amazing natural dye history there that I've been looking deeply into. And So the wood dyes, they have incredible colour fastness, they're very strong, they're very stable, they don't tend to modify with changes in pH levels. They don't need a mordant, they're substantive dyes with good fastness. So for the project, I've been looking at local wood dyes and making samples and then having them lab tested for colour fastness, for wash, rub and light, and also looking at how to translate them into pigments. So I wanted to look at the sources that are really abundant. Around me, that's things like hawthorn, oak, alder, birch. There's many kinds of very abundant trees around me. Some that I've found that have the most interesting colour have been alder, hawthorn and oak. And I've become more curious about how these could be farmed in not necessarily a plantation style where they're going to be chopped down, but more in an orchard style where the trees continue to live and actually create biodiversity. And I've been really interested in other examples around the world where coppicing is used as a means for harvesting the wood dye. And also in Indonesia, I visited farms where they simply harvest the leaf. And I found in my work that, for example, with oak, there is as much pigment and tannic acid in the leaf as I could need from the wood. So there's really no need to chop down the tree, which I think is really quite interesting. So yeah, how do we work with plant materials that are just the leaf and the nut or fruit so we can leave the tree and the ecosystem intact? So for oak, I found the leaf is a great dye material. For alder, the cones are incredible. There's so much colour in them. I've been working with bramble, using the cane. Bramble, everyone wants to cut back. It's one of these we call invasive species that is actually beneficial to the land, to the landowner, farmer, if it's cut back. Another part of this project has been looking at what we call invasives or naturalized plants. So bramble's a great one. Bracken is another. It's a great pioneer plant that will just take over huge swathes of landscape. I actually found it quite hazardous to work with because it's quite a toxic plant. It's not something that I would actually take forward into a production, but I think it has a lot of potential for its colour. Bramble cane has been incredible. You can see some samples at the front. There's a bright yellow that comes from bramble, which was a great surprise to me. And hawthorn just creates the most incredible dusty pink. There's samples of all of these from this project at the front. So all the samples have been made with regeneratively farmed lamb's wool from Somerset. They've all been lab tested for wash, rub and light fastness. They've all passed, which I knew they would because they are really strong tannin dyes. This summer I'm going to continue this research looking at the plants that are available now, because this project has all been done in the fallow season with the winter dyes. So now we've got all of the fresh green shoots, and so I'm going to be interested in Himalayan balsam and Japanese knotweed as other invasive species. I'm running out of time a bit, so I'll just quickly get through this last bit. But so I'm really, part of my project has been looking at the pigment production. What's important for that is that it's small, dry, storable, transportable. It's really very simple equipment that's used for this. It's essentially brewery equipment, big pots that can be heated with a false bottom, 2 pipes for water in and water out, and a thermometer. It's very simple equipment. And if you're making the pigments, you need a reduction vessel to simply reduce and evaporate the water. And depending on how resinous the plant is, you're going to be looking at making cakes, powder, or a resin. For me, it's really interesting to look at how these pigments can then not just be used for dyeing, but also for printmaking, for packaging. And as I only work with soil-to-soil systems, I like to look at the whole production system. And so screen printing is not an option for me because it uses plastic mesh screens and also a toxic light-sensitive photoreactive gel to expose the screens. Lino printing also has a really toxic mineral content in the boiled linseed oil. So I've been looking at woodblock printing with just carved whole wood, and also there's some examples at the front of my Botanical Inks logo that I've stamp printed with natural dyes from the project, and also indigo dye with woodblock stamps. As I see this as a really logical option for minimalistic packaging in the UK using our local plants and local woods. Yeah, so I think that's most of what I have to say. So I'll leave it there. Thank you.
Thank you, Babs. Thank you, Babs. That was really super interesting and so much food for thought there. Does anyone, before we move on to Sophie, have any quick questions specific to what Babs talked about?
Hi, that was amazingly interesting. I thought it was fascinating. Just on your wood dyes and your leaves, when do you harvest, like hawthorn, and when they're very young or halfway through the season?
So the project I've been working on, I've just been doing in the winter so far, and all of the things I've been working with have been windfall in the storms. So the hawthorn has just let go huge branches by the roadside in the winter. The alder cones, they all just fall off in the winter. You can actually collect them all year round.
Yeah.
But for the wood, it's whenever you would naturally do your coppicing. I think that varies for different people, or you could rely on windfall depending on what kind of quantity you're looking at.
Okay, thank you.
I'm another natural dyer. I grow quite a lot of commercial scale dyes. I dry most of the dye stuff, so they go through unromantically a garden shredder or something similar, and then they're put into bags in the dye vat. Is that something that the dye houses would accept, do you think?
I mean, like a tea bag, a mesh bag.
You got it.
Yeah, I think that could potentially work. I found that extraction isn't necessarily as efficient when it's bagged up, but I think that's a great way of transporting and selling things. For me, the extracts or the resin with just the pure pigment makes the whole process a lot simpler and quicker. But that is definitely one way of doing it, and there's nothing wrong with that, for sure.
Yeah, I mean, I use extracts as well, so I'm aware of how much easier it is. I was just wondering whether the dye houses would actually accept that. We should probably talk afterwards as well.
Yeah, I was going to say, thank you. We've got time for more questions at the end. I think that we should move on to Sophie Holt now. Sophie is a founder of social enterprise Pigment Organic Dyes, which offer therapeutic environment, training and employment support to people that are often excluded from standard workplaces. So Sophie's passion is to grow dyes, stems from her organic horticultural background and love for natural textiles. She lives in South Devon and farms as part of the Badderford Collective. Sophie's currently working on upscaling Pigment's dye growing capacity whilst designing a therapeutic social impact program ready for piloting this autumn. She will be launching her trainee program in spring 24, and today she's going to talk to us about her passion to connect people to the land, the immense benefits in doing so, and how a micro enterprise dye business can be used as a vehicle for change. So Sophie, welcome.
Thank you, Zoe. Can everyone hear me? Is that all right? I'm going to try and speak slowly, but I have a habit of rambling really quickly, so bear with me. Yeah, so I've wanted to set up a social enterprise sort of benefiting people with learning disabilities since leaving university 10 years ago. But the problem I kept finding was land access. So accessing land when you don't have the money to sort of buy it outright was really difficult. Just renting sort of half an acre, I sort of nearly got there about 3 times. And sort of 8 years ago, had like a 50-page business plan and was approaching landowners, and it was a real battle to kind of get my message through in the right way, and for people to sort of trust that having people onto their land was going to be something that suited them. So I started the process of trying to find land again after having my daughter in 2020 and after COVID lockdown. It kind of gave me a lot of time to think about what I was wanting to do, and after I'd discovered natural dyeing and recognizing that growing natural dyes could kind of tie my two passions together of farming and working with fabric, because I was working in an upholstery workshop beforehand, so I've kind of always worked with textiles and horticulture, so it's kind of tying the two together. But I've also worked on care farms where I've found resources have been kind of wasted in lots of ways, whether that's human resources or the outcome of growing vegetables or flowers. And I've seen the sort of commercial versus therapeutic environment work really well in places such as Organic Blooms in Bristol, and wanted to sort of replicate that in Devon, which is where I am from and where I live now. So yeah, 2020 I started growing madder in my garden, and then the following year I moved to a site sort of west side of Totnes and was growing about 12 9-metre beds of varying different plants, and had moved my madder to there, because if anyone knows madder, it's a 4-year-old crop until you can harvest it. So I've moved them 4 times now. They're in the 4th year, my oldest ones, and they're going to be harvested this autumn, and then more will come, but they've had a journey. And in 2021 I started to look for somewhere else to grow with more autonomy, because where I was at that time, it's difficult when you haven't got access to machinery and you're trying to do, I was doing completely no dig beds, which is something I'm still striving for, but the human sort of input to that was difficult to balance. And having access to water and things, it made sense to, when I was working at Badford Farm, which is in South Devon, near to Ashburton, I was working at Vital Seeds, which is also on the site, and I had a chat to Guy and Geeti Singh Watson, who own the land there, and I moved there, and that's where I am now. I'm part of Badford Collective, which is 5 businesses based on the site, all micro enterprises, and then there's Badford Farm at the top of the hill that are growing for Riverford. So it's a good collective of different enterprises all collaborating and helping each other along the way, which I think is really beneficial for startups. And last year I grew about 6 35-metre beds of a mixture of annual, biennial and perennial crops. Annual things like Coreopsis, Tagetes, Scabious, Orange Cosmos, Hopi Black Sunflowers, and they're the most intensive pickers, so I can't pick enough of those in the season. It's just about to start, so feeling a bit apprehensive about that, but yeah, it's a lot of picking for those. And then there's the biennials such as Weld, and I kind of treat dye as chamomile as one of those because it's a short-lived perennial. They're also quite high yielding. And then there's perennials such as madder, yarrow, tansy and St John's wort. I've just brought 3 samples of the primary sort of colours that I grow on the table there. There's madder which is the red, Weld, which is the bright yellow, and then the black night scabious, which is the bluey green you can see there. So that was last year, and then I launched my website in December last year, which is just selling sort of artisan scale retail dye flowers, and at the moment it's just dye flowers, but the roots from the madder will be starting this autumn. That's predominantly sort of 100 grams, 50 grams, 100 grams, people sort of experimenting at home. Most of my sales come in over the sort of winter months, and then they've sort of trickled off as my stocks got lower. I'm hoping that sort of elongates a little bit longer into the season next year. It's good that I've sold out of lots of crops, but it also means that it was very seasonal, my income over the last year. I incorporated in February, which is a community interest company, limited by guarantee. So although the social impact programme hasn't started yet, that's planned to start next year, as Zoe mentioned, and that's it's had to go that way, so that I've incorporated the business, got everything set up, and then it can emulate that business, that working environment for people to come and be part of that, which I'll go on to in a moment. So yeah, apart from online sales, I've had 6 commissions from just over the winter, so it's still it's small scale, and that varied from local pubs wanting me to dye their aprons, designers that have wanted me to do sort of 10 meters of fabric for a particular dress they want to run in a certain color. There's been farmers that have approached me to dye some of their wool, and shops to do like an own label project with dyeing for dresses in a couple of different colours. So it's still quite small scale, but there's definitely a locality to those commissions as well. They're all based in South-West, which feels really lovely to be part of that, as well as the South-West England Fibreshed, and that some of those have come from that as well. So it's all this like sort of networking of the bioregional element of what Fibreshed does. There's a few wholesale sales that I've had, and then I've kind of launched into this season. So since March, been planting, seed sowing and planting beds like crazy. And without my volunteers, I wouldn't have been able to upscale, but I'm now growing on 1/4 of an acre, which is 10 35-meter beds. Again, mixture of biennials, annuals and perennials. And I've got about 1/4 of an acre in a green manure ley. So I have a 1/2 acre site that I am currently on. I am documenting the season as I go through, which is part of the work with Fibreshed, and sort of looking to educate designers in textiles industry, just to kind of explain the whole process so that it's more replicable as we go forward, and they can understand that the lead times are there for a reason. So buying into a certain colour means that they have to let me know by sort of February the previous year. And yeah, as Zoe mentioned, I've got a social impact pilot this autumn, which is working with the local council to get people with additional needs onto the land, which I will talk about in a minute. I'm starting to use last year's stock in dyeing fabric. So at Badderford Farm, I have a business unit, which it's quite small, but it's got 2 induction hobs with 70-litre pans, a drying cabinet which I've built to dry the flowers. I've got sort of 24 racks that are on mesh with 14 computer fans that are blowing warm air around. So it's a massive dehydrator in one sense. And I'd like to work towards a community dye kitchen in the South-West region, where we can sort of collectively bring dye growers around, can bring their stock together to take on larger commissions, because I think that would help us move forward in making this more sustainable. Launching my social impact program next year. And this is all about getting people with additional needs, people that don't usually get access to these kind of workplaces at all. They're quite often in the council's offered charity shops as a placement to give them work experience, and that's pretty much about it. And if not that, it's like a blanketed approach, just to go and be placed there and not sort of moving on to what they might want to work towards, such as employment or training. So my real passion is to connect people to the land, and to do that I will be offering horticultural therapy, AQA level training, which is specific to that person, bespoke to their skills and interests, and then employment support with the Reaching for Independence team in the local council to work with local employers and to advocate having neurodiverse people in the workplace, basically. The benefits of horticultural therapy are kind of so well known, and I want to make that more accessible to lots of people. Being around the plants, being outside, getting the physical benefits from just working the land, and the social interactions as well is so important, not just for people that usually get to access workplaces, but also people with learning disabilities and additional needs. So I think the scale that I'm at is really beneficial for that. It allows people to be the centre of the business and gain well-being from being in that environment, rather than it being a stressful field scale, dirty agricultural environment. So I think the scale I'm at works well in terms of market garden scale for working with hand tools, for seeing every part of the process from seed to dyed fabric or packaged dyes, which they'll all be part of. And yeah, I'm kind of working towards linking up with corporates to either gain sponsorship for trainees or to be advocates of disability confident employers as well. So it's all a pathway to that. And that's kind of all I had to say.
That's brilliant, Sophie. Thank you. It's so much for one project. There's so many different layers and aspects to it. Does anyone have a quick question for Sophie before we move on? Yeah?
Can't speak with the pen in my mouth. I'm really interested in your scale point. Stuff being small, particularly if it's regenerative or in ethos, regardless of what it is, often it has to be small. But we're encouraged generally that success is big stuff. So you've been very eloquent in why small is good, but I just wondered, to get to that point, do you have any advice how other people can be really happy in doing small scale stuff? Does that make sense?
To get to what point, sorry?
To the point where you're happy about that your scale is appropriate for what you want to do. I mean, did you not have moments as you were going along that journey where people were going, oh, but that's not going to work because it's not big enough? How did you get to that point where you're now so happy in how you are approaching your business?
I mean, it's still early days, so I'm still learning, and I don't know if I've got to that point. I'm interested in how it can be upscaled. That's really upscale in the sense that maybe perhaps dye growers in a local region can collectively bring their dyes together to take on larger commissions. I think the smaller scale, in terms of there's so many efficiencies to market gardens and the way that they manage the soil and the way that there's not space wasted. The people-centered labour instead of machinery is better for the environment and the way that the crops survive. So there's so many efficiencies to smaller scale growing that I think it shows that there's the outcome is more than you think it is, and especially with annual crops, it's actually requiring more picking than upscaling. So if you've got ways of picking it quickly enough, you're getting enough crop, basically. Yeah.
Thank you. It's a complicated topic, isn't it? And on that, I think we'll move on to William, because he's looking at things in a slightly different scale. William Hudson is a farmer, director of Hodmedods, lecturer in regenerative agriculture. He's co-creator of Jasper, a project looking at how we can turn fibre and plant dyes into agricultural crops, so moving above an acre and beyond the artisan level. So today William would like to raise questions mainly. How do we do this on a practical level within planetary boundaries and to the appropriate scale, whilst not concentrating profit into the hands of a few, which often happens when you scale up large. So we've got some very big and interesting questions, and I'm going to hand over to William now.
Thank you. I've been interested in horticulture and scaling crops and designing new crops all my life, and we started off with fruit and vegetables, and with Hodmedods we've managed now to be growing about 60 tons of lentils, chickpeas. They told us that neither of those crops could grow in the UK. That was agronomists for you. So we're good at machinery. We're good at small-scale machinery with a horticultural background. I've been interested mainly more in fibre in the last 20 years than I have dyes, but in the last 5 or 6 years I've become very interested in dyes. So our interest is really the overarching idea of the Jasper project is to get the oil off our backs. So that's quite a big ask. And when we start looking around the world and we see the problems of man-made fibres, of microfibres that we ingest, and the chemicals that are involved in dyeing, it's absolutely massive. And so yeah, let's start off with a big idea. Bringing it back down to reality, however, what we're hoping to do specifically with the Jasper project is on 2 levels. The first level is that we're hoping to create a closed label called Jasper, which will have a logo, and it will be similar to the Hodmedods story. Hodmedods sells its products by telling the story, and Jasper will sell clothes, hopefully, by telling the same story. The next part of Jasper is going to be knowledge exchange, where people can use it as a marketplace for knowledge, or giving away knowledge, and finding markets for the products that they produce, small or large scale. My interest, as well as this, is actually trying to find out how we can use a small tractor with a relatively cheap machine to get brambles into a dye vat. And farmers are looking for other crops at the moment, and I don't want, we have no aspirations of dye crops being made into large-scale commodities. We very much believe that a second chance at an industry, the clothes industry, fabric industry, should be made of small links to a chain. We kind of think that when you concentrate investment, you concentrate profit, and that usually means by screwing somebody else out of a living. Which is very much happened as what's happened throughout the world. So we're talking about hopefully encouraging, helping knowledge exchange, lots of small businesses to create a symbiotic enabling process whereby crops can be grown on a farm scale with machinery. People in Sophie's world, and I'm delighted they can do it, don't seem to get a bad back very quickly. In my world, they seem to. But this will always be a relatively labour-intensive concept of these crops. But the diversity of things that we've already got growing on our farms, and also looking historically at the things that used to be an amazing industry. Nobody will have noticed it, but there is an acre of very badly grown woad by the wood over there. Just drilling woad is a problem because it's so difficult to drill. Good news is, rest of Europe, there are still these crops being grown. They know how to do it. We need to reintroduce these things back into industry, but back into a different industry, which helps lots of people create small businesses. We're looking with fibre, for example. We're doing some work with tomato fibre, which is fascinating. There's somebody in Holland making T-shirts out of tomato stalks. We're looking at fat hen. We're looking at quinoa stalks. There's a whole list of things that we could be using fibre for that we have no idea what we're used for. And just for example, hands up who's wearing a free pair of bamboo socks. There you go. One. Usually it's more than that when I say that. But, you know, who thought of wearing bamboo? I mean, you know, it's an extraordinary transition. But I think the real realization of this is the damage that our conventional fabric dyeing industry throughout the world is doing to the environment is massive. So, huge aspirational desire here to try and do something about it. But Jasper is going to be about trying to coordinate help people's awareness, people's small businesses, and see if we can start something off which is viable on a scale that we can then put onto farms. And I'm not saying that the smaller scale has a place. I think it very, very much does have a place. But at the same time, if you look at the sheer volume of clothes and the volume of dye that we actually need, we've got to get it bigger than that. That stuff, I think, is utterly gorgeous. It's worth every last penny. And then at the other end of the scale, we've still got to have T-shirts hopefully made out of tomatoes after we've eaten the tomatoes. That's me.
So do we have any questions for William after his interesting proposition? Yeah.
Is it? I wondered if you'd looked at nettles. I was in Bhutan several years ago, and one of the communities there were rejuvenated because they recognised that the nettle crop was a source of income, and people like Vivienne Westwood and people like that have used nettle fibres. I wondered if you looked at nettles at all.
Yeah, no, we've looked a lot at nettles. We've actually been talking to a company in Cardiganshire who made 200 pairs of jeans out of nettles, and they got their nettles from Nepal. Anyone know who uses nettles commercially in this country? One other company I know. Who likes cheese? Who likes yarg? It's nettles on the outside of yarg. And yarg is made by the Gray family, and yarg is grey backwards. But that they actually grow nettles in a tunnel to stick on the outside of their cheese. So, you know, look at the diversity from a pair of jeans that come all the way from Cardiganshire via Nepal, or whichever way you want to put it, and a coating for the outside of cheese. There are so many plants out there that we just don't understand what they're for and what they used to be used for. And it's such an exciting area. Bedtime reading, if anyone wants to get blown away by all of this. Culpeper. Culpeper mentions both chickpeas and lentils. He published that book in 1700. Get a copy. It's brilliant.
Oh, I think we have a question. We have a question over there.
So the thing I love about Hodmedods is that focus in kind of one specific regional area. Is that what you're looking to do with Jasper as well? Is it based in a kind of bioregion in the same way that Fibreshed is, or are you really looking much farther flung and then coming back and kind of just looking to distribute across the UK?
Yeah, Hodmedods, if it's got Hodmedods on it, it's grown in the UK, although we're now we've got Brazil nuts, and guess where they come from. Our vision of Jasper is very, very global, but global and local. So there are so many crops from other parts of the world that we want to start looking at. And unfortunately, with my farming friends in East Anglia, I've got access to land, and I've got access to machinery, and I've got access to the land we want and the irrigation we want. So global and local.
Thank you very much. I was really interested in what you were saying, Babs, about the invasive plants and particularly the Japanese knotweed. Have you had any idea what sort of colors that might produce? Have you made any experiments already?
I haven't got around to doing that yet. I've been waiting for it to come back up above the earth. So I'll be working on that this summer. But I've been hearing about a range of different colours that are possible.
So have you heard somebody has been doing that already, or is it just an idea?
Yeah, no, there have been people dying with it already. So yeah, that one I know is going to give some interesting results. Himalayan balsam, I don't know of anyone using that as a dye, so that will be a complete new exploration for me. But Japanese knotweed, I feel quite confident about.
Hi. If you in the tanning of vegetable tanning leather, that produces different colours as the base raw tannage, depending on the tree bark that's used in the tanning process. I wonder if you've done any experiments with dyeing leather from different natural dyes.
I don't work with leather. I just work with textiles and paper.
Okay.
So I don't have any experience of that, but you would get a different colour for sure from every different wood dye, wood plant that you use with leather.
Yeah.
But I couldn't speak to it.
Does anyone in the audience have any experience with leather? Because we just had the talk earlier on leather, and it'd be interesting to bring in how you bring colour into that. I don't know either. Does anyone here have any insight? Yeah?
So you could just talk to British pasture leather to get some insight into what each of the different tannins offer the leather in terms of characteristics. I don't think it's necessarily going to give you a colour. You would still, it would have different shades, but it would still have the characteristics of the original hide, from my understanding. I think talk to leather-specific people.
Thank you.
I have a question for William. What dye plants are you looking to be farming in the UK? Do you know at the moment?
I don't know. What we're looking at the moment is predominantly woad and madder. We're looking at things that we can grow easily to start with. That's because we're trying to scale to look at a situation where we could do a 5 acre or a 10 acre. So we're interested in everything, but that's what we're trying to specialise in at the moment. But there's a really interesting point that you were talking about seasonal, plants that regrow. I was talking to a guy in Sweden a little while ago, and he was saying that there are specific times of the year when plants have more sugars in their root and more sugars in their stem as the seasons go past. And a lot of this stuff, we've forgotten about it. We don't know how it works. Just going back to the woad thing, because woad is complicated to process, but it's not so complicated that you can't put it on farm. What we're trying to do is to see if we can find ways of making sure that where it's grown, the farmer can then add value rather than just creating a process. Woad is difficult because it's got to be kept fresh and so on. But commodity markets where you put stuff in a bulk in a lorry and that's the last you see of it, and you get paid very little of it, is not what we should be doing. It's not the place that farming should have been going either.
I have a question, William. I was wondering about if you're trying to add value for farmers, and do you see it as creating you mentioned creating a brand, which is, that's further down the supply chain, much further from the farmers, and I wondered if you saw how you would coordinate the actual materials that a farmer might make, whether that be a fibre flax or a natural dye, and at what stage they would get the material to, and then where it would go. Do you see it as, because Hodmedods doesn't actually cook things with lentils, it sells the actual raw lentils. So do you see it, but making clothing is like selling bread or selling a ready meal or something. There's a lot of processing to get to that point. Do you see Jasper as just being a clothing brand or facilitating farmers to add value?
It's the knowledge exchange thing that I think is so important, and it may well be that there could be consistencies that need to be developed. So so in other words, coordinating how people at dye cloth want to buy the ingredients that a farmer can produce. So if you get 10 different farmers with 10 different types of product, that's probably not a good idea. So trying to coordinate those sorts of things and then translate that back onto farming language, that's what we want to try and do.
Right. So this sort of container for knowledge, what sort of form do you see that being? Some kind of website or what? Okay.
Here's the rest of my mad, insane idea. I'm a part-time lecturer at Writtle on regenerative farming. We have a proposal at Writtle to try and create a degree course which will be about growing fibre and dye, processing fibre and dye. It'll be about spinning, weaving, the whole lot, all the way through. Vice Chancellor doesn't know this very much yet, so please don't tell everybody. But to try and that's part of the delivery process that we're talking about. So yeah, this is delusional alcohol fused induced concepts at the moment, but we seem to have the bits in the jigsaw puzzle box. We now want to try and put the jigsaw puzzle together and get it out of the box. But I mean, Writtle as a hall of academe is a place that can create degree courses. They've got a whole load of long words and PhDs and stuff like that. They can do this sort of thing, and apparently this doesn't happen anywhere else, where all of these things are put together. So that's one element. The other element will just be some sort of website and dating agency to bring people together. And where we make our money, by the way, I mean, I hope it's going to be an NGO, but it will be an entity which hopefully will attract grants, which we can then give out and assign to proper projects. And then I'm hoping that we'll make a small charge for the use of the Jasper logo.
Yeah, sounds exciting. We have another question?
Just going on from what you were saying, as far as farmers are concerned, as far as our farm is concerned, I can see Weld is tying in with SFI as winter cover, and then you harvest the Weld in the summer, and you've still got the cover. So it would tie in with SFI with farming at the moment.
That's fascinating, actually, because if we're looking at some of the 120-day crops like lentils and flax. It means that you can grow a crop and a half a year. So we overwinter a crop. The problem at the moment is that a lot of those overwinter cover crops are either grazed off, okay, that's turned into money, but usually they're ploughed in or left. So being able to take a revenue off winter crops and then growing the 130-day crops, that's exactly what we're talking about doing, and I think it's really important. The days, sorry to bang on about farming, I can't help it, but the days of one field, one crop, 1 year, to a large extent, they're over. We can't farm like that anymore. We've got to mix it all up.
Hey, just in terms of plant dyeing, I'm just curious about how much you feel you can find the plants wild, or whether all the plants used for dyeing are cultivated. I actually like either of you. I'm sure you both have different thoughts.
Well, so for the project I'm doing, it's very small scale. It's just samples, so I've easily wildcrafted them from the land where I'm based, but with a view that these are things that can be cultivated, but actually need very little cultivation and no agrochemicals. Using an orchard system, essentially, you're growing the trees, but you're not having to uproot them or chop them down. You're able to coppice as your harvest, or collect the leaf when it's naturally coming away as windfall at the end of the summer, or the nut or the fruit in the autumn. So not having to replant every season, I think, is a great way of reducing energy costs and labour and time, and keeping the soil integral as well. But I'm really also interested in the creating biodiversity and sustaining it, which I think is really important by not removing the actual trees, allowing them to live long term. So I'd like to see that as a more of a normal model for farming natural dyes.
So you were asking how much cloth you can dye with the varying scales. Was that the question, sort of?
No, it was more. Are you able to source plants elsewhere that aren't cultivated in order to do your businesses?
So that's not necessarily of my interest. I'm trying to grow the dyes in a commercial way that we can harvest them and make it efficient for upscaling. So yeah, maybe that was more aimed.
Yeah, thank you.
I would add that yes, you absolutely can forage for dyes as well, and I really encourage that if you have access to land where it's allowed.
Yeah.
There's such abundance of plants, things like nettles, which you know, they're amazing dyes. You cut them back, they grow back, they're super regenerative. So many windfall materials like the alder cones and all kinds of nuts and seeds and fruits, and I mean, we have such an abundance of wild, accessible and natural dyes in this country. You don't need to cultivate, whether that's for a small scale or a large scale. There's lots of ways of doing things.
Amazing, thank you.
Yeah, fine.
I just wanted to ask, in terms of combating problems of like wash fastness with using the natural dyes, if you were to create a clothing brand, I don't know, because Babs was saying about using the more tannin-rich materials, would that be a way of combating when creating like clothing brands? If that makes sense.
So it helps to have a good understanding of natural dyes to begin with, and to understand which dyes have suitable fastness in terms of wash, light and rub if you're wanting to create a commercial product. So having had 15 years of researching and developing natural dye practice, I feel confident of doing that and consult on that for a lot of brands. So it's about selecting the plant that's suitable for the particular fibre you're working with, and that will be different depending on it's a cellulose or protein fibre, and there's a lot of variation within those two categories as well. So selecting your dye, also selecting the mordant. If you're wanting to use just a substantive dye with no additional mordant, then you have a group of substantive dyes that you can work with. And I focused in on the wood dyes for this particular project I've been working on, but substantive dyes is a huge range. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, I just, because most materials you use are going to fade, or to a certain extent. How would you advertise that within your brand, with that sort of like letting people know if they could fade to a certain extent, or how would you sort of combat that?
Well, I think firstly it's important to recognise that there's a bit of a misconception about natural dyes fading more than synthetic dyes. I just like to point out to people often when they talk about this, that if you have a black t-shirt and you leave it out on a summer's day, it's going to be a grey t-shirt at the end of the day or after a few days. Synthetic dyes are not colour fast. They're not 100% colour fast, and nor are natural dyes. No dyes are. Nothing is. You know, nothing's permanent. So it's about how do you sustain the longevity of the colours, and that comes down to care for both synthetic and natural. So it's not leaving things out in direct, strong sunlight for prolonged periods of time, storing it away in drawers and cupboards, making sure that you're washing it gently by hand like you would with something delicate like silk or lingerie, not putting things in the washing machine, which is really terrible for delicate fibres and dyes. And also a really important thing is using the right soap. And often people will sling things in the washing machine with a standard detergent, which is incredibly high in the pH level as an alkaline substance, and that's going to degrade the vibrancy of dyes. So I always work with a pH neutral soap, a gentle, organic, natural Castile pH neutral soap. So if you're doing all these things and you're practicing good aftercare of fabrics and garments, then that's going to, you know, make your dyes last just as long, if not longer, than any synthetic fabrics or garments. So it's about communicating that effectively in your printed merchandise or your online merchandise, or however you're communicating aftercare to your clients and customers.
Thank you, Babs. A lot of this is about communication, I think. And I know we're reaching the end of our session, and we've had lots of brilliant questions, and I'd really like to thank our amazing panelists. But also, we do have this tent for another half an hour, and so really we'd like to continue the conversation. So anybody who would like to continue the conversation with any of us, I'd like to invite you just to come up here, and we'll continue the conversation here. And it might be a bit easier than audience to panel if we. If anyone would like to come up, please do so. And thank you very much for your questions and your time. And thank you to the panelists as well.